It's really a privilege to be here this morning to share our story with you, as imperfect and in progress as it is. And I will be truthfully honest and open with you as I go through this story about some of the things that we probably did really wrong, and I'll take that on my own. So I'll just tell you that it's not a beautiful, perfect story, but I'm privileged to share it with you today and try to hit some of the things that might be of interest. And so we're going to do a little Q&A at the end. If I miss some things, please stop me and ask. I don't roll out of bed for many people this early in the morning, so I'm really happy that you rolled out for me. We'll see how the morning goes. It's almost like group therapy to be with individuals in a room like this who share this work. You know, we don't always find each other. We have to look for each other. And I meet up with Martha Doris for group therapy as often as I can and share the story where we are. She's heard our story, which has been in progress for about 4.5 years formally. And I tell her every now and then, if Hollywood could get a hold of our 4.5-year story, it would be 50 Shades of Crazy. I mean, we are, building all the time. We're shifting things. We get down a path. We come back. We start again. So I'm sure all of you are kind of in various stages of your work as well. So we'll compare notes as we get on through this. As many of you have experienced yourself, and as we just said, that's not my mother, Colin, I'm pretty sure. You all, how many of you all have, you don't have to raise your hands if you don't want to, but how many of you have pursued higher education, gone to college, maybe have a student loan or two, have kids in college, have relatives, nieces, nephews in college, all of us. It's hard to imagine when we think about it on a daily basis, where would we be if we hadn't had that opportunity? And where would we be if we hadn't had the means to get there? What will we be doing now? That's also my mother, probably. I don't call him too early. So it's kind of hard to imagine. My phone rang a couple of weeks ago, and on the other end of the line was a young man, and he was speaking broken English. I could barely make it out. And in fact, you're rushing through your day, your phone rings, you pick it up, and you expect to kind of know who it is. But there was this young voice on the other end, and I tried to make out what he was saying. And what he was trying to tell me is that his father had given him my number. His father's employer had found me and gave him my number and called because he had a dream that he wanted to go to college, and that he was told from the time he was young that this was not possible, that they couldn't afford it, that they'd never have the means for him to go. And he lives in a very agricultural part of Florida, first generation migrant worker. And we had a nice long conversation. It hit me later that I remembered the conversation with his father's employer a few months ago, who was sharing his story with me. And I said, please, please, please don't let him think he could never go. There's federal aid that possibly he could qualify for. Have him connect with us. And he did. And I think we ended that conversation with a plan for him. He's 18, he's entering his senior year of high school, and we're going to stay with him until he gets what he needs. And that really is the heart of who we serve. That's our story, in essence. We are, our customer at the cleanest form I can share with you is that first generation, low to moderate income, high school seniors or adult learners are really who we serve. So let me go through and share a little bit with you today about who we are, what we provide, and then our journey around really focusing on the consumer. As an organization, Federal Student Aid, our customer experience group sits inside this organization called Federal Student Aid, which is the arm of the Department of Education that lends money for higher ed. And so the organization, we like to call ourselves the proud sponsors of the American mind, because we believe that what we do in disseminating higher education aid in the form of Title IV funds for the Higher Education Act is really our mission. We're very mission focused around that. We're a fairly small organization, about 1,200 employees in total. The customer experience piece of that is about 9%. So I'll share with you what that organization has become to look like. But as you can see here, we're probably the largest provider of aid for higher ed in the country. We have about $1 trillion portfolio right now, which, believe me, on any given day, there's a lot of public scrutiny around these numbers. So we realize that we are working with a lot of visibility around that accountability for that $1 trillion of aid. And we're very focused on how do we make sure that our constituents, our consumers, these kids who want to go to college, don't bite off more than they can chew. And I think that's been a very, very tough challenge for us around the customer groups that we serve. The aid comes in forms of grants, loans, and work-study programs. If anybody's been to school, got kids going to school, you're probably familiar with some of this. And so that's the broader part of federal student aid. This is what the organization of federal student aid looks like. So does it kind of a heavy front office. We do a lot of work around policy making and those kinds of things. But if you look down at the bottom in the blue, this constitutes the bulk of our operating committee, the technology, the compliance, the operations, and the customer experience. You'll see we sit at the operating committee level with our partners in technology and operations. And I can't tell you how important that part is. That's a big lesson learned for us, I think, and it's actually something that's worked well, is sitting at the operating committee level, shoulder to shoulder with the key partners you need to do this work. Technology, operations, compliance, all of that, policy making is pretty important to what we do. Okay, so this is where our journey started. In 2008-9, you might remember we had a little financial crisis in the country. I don't know how many of you remember much about that or got impacted by that, but this is really kind of where our story started in terms of a true customer experience organization. So the banks were taken out, this is a oversimplified, banks were taken out of the middle of the lending process, and suddenly overnight, the Department of Education had customers. 22 million applicants a year is pretty much what we push through the pipeline. 40 million borrowers on the other end. Some of you might be part of that 40 million here in the room, I'm thinking, if you are. And so this is the life cycle for us, is what do we put in the pipeline for aid, and then what do we serve on the back end? So around 2009, 2010, we wake up in the Department of Education and we have customers. And I was in 2010 doing work elsewhere when the chief operating officer of the federal student aid called me and remembered some of this work we had done back in the financial service sector and said, we have customers now at Department of Education and we're thinking we need a customer-focused organization, and why don't you come on over here and help us, stand that up? What do you think? And I thought that sounds hideous, but when do I come? So we got together, and sort of late 2010 as we began to kind of create, what does this need to look like? What does the organization need to look like and stand up? And in earnest, we really started the organizational construct when I came in, which was the very end of 2010, January of 2011, so roughly 4.5 years ago, we really began the organization. My first day on the job, I was sitting in the operating committee meeting, very first day, alongside some of the other folks in the operating committee and trying to start to learn the language. We didn't have an organization really at the time, although there were individuals across the organization that had been close to customer-focused work, call centers, the application process and all that. So they were sort of assigned over to me, and I was beginning to learn what the operation looked like. So beginning day one, we had some fragments of the operation that were kind of sent to us to begin to form as an organization. We had that to kind of start with. There was a bit of history around where these pieces and parts came from, but we did surveys and we did the application process and we managed call centers, so we began to coalesce all of that together. And so in January, the first piece of work that we did was to begin to create the organization. It's like running along beside a speeding train. You probably can identify with this, and you're kind of grabbing on to not stop movement while you're creating an organization. But anyone who's created an organization in federal government knows that it is not quick work. It's very careful work. You make decisions you have to live with for a while. And so how to set it up was really core to the thinking that I was bringing and trying to think about at the time. I had two real principles going into thinking about how to create this organization, and one of them was we've got to do the right thing by taxpayers. Cost neutrality was really important to me. We are going to figure out how to do this work at no incremental expense, at least early on. And if I can find a way to create an efficiency and give money back to the taxpayer, to the Treasury, we'll start there. And the reason for that was that I needed to build some credibility and get some traction early. And so those were the two fundamental beliefs that I had in building this organization to start with. If you look at the top green here, this was the roadmap that we started with. We did this together in Federal Student Aid. Is what is the life cycle of our constituents that we serve? And it really starts on that far left side over there where students are shopping and looking for higher ed. Where are they going? Where they're thinking about school. Where should they go? How do they fund it? And so part of the process in the life cycle starts with this shopping effort over here. Applying for aid is kind of the second step. They go to the free application for federal student aid. You've heard of the FAFSA? That's the next step in this process for our customers, at least. They receive aid, they go to school, then they become, that lifelong in repayment process, and then the loan resolution. And so we said, if we look at that life cycle, why don't we build our organization really around that where we can? It's a little bit like building a house. Let's decorate the rooms we need that are critical first, and then we'll move ourselves, maybe expand later. And so what you see here is what we look like today. If you looked at us in 2011, you'd probably only see one or two boxes here in earnest. So what we have today is a group, we call it the Student Experience Group, that really focuses on that part of the life cycle that deals with the application process. And they are managing the FAFSA. They are managing the call centers that are created around that front-end application process. They are responsible for 22 million applicants a year that get into that pipeline. Small group, but they know that business and they know the aid business. They work a lot with our policymakers. And so there's a leader in that group that is on my leadership group, my staff. We created a couple of years ago a real focus on the school experience. There are 6,500 colleges and universities around the country. Believe it or not, it's a big population, and we deal with all of them to disseminate Title IV aid. So we are structured around making sure that we understand the partnership with them as channels, really, and in some cases customers, to deal with that aid and how do they impact students by way of what we give to them. So there's an entire stream of customer-focused work that really runs through the schools in the system. And then the borrower strategy has begun to emerge, and I put it in dots there because this is emerging work for us. We've done quite a bit around it for the last couple of years, but we are determined to have a better, more disciplined focus on the 40 million borrowers who are in repayment, in some cases headed straight for default. We've done a lot of segmentation around this, and I'll speak to the data-driven piece of this shortly, but a lot of work around how do you segment this 40 million borrower base and understand if you have 24 hours in a day, where should you start in terms of making the situation different for these borrowers? And we've chosen to start by making sure students who come out of repayment understand their repayment plans and their choices and their options and that they're on a good track. We have witnessed too many students coming out of the grace period after school and not even realizing that they signed up to pay money back. It happens. None of them are your kids, I'm sure, but it does happen, so we want to make sure that there's a lot of awareness around that, and heretofore, that has been handled a lot by the servicers on the back end that we contract with, or the schools, so we can do more there. We've done a lot of data-driven work here on understanding, can we learn from the pattern that students are going through on the back end in repayment and identify those who are headed for default? And can we get them before they get there? Can we get them before they miss enough payments to hurt their credit rating? And so we're doing a lot of work around that with some good success, some push emails and all that. So more to come on that strategy in our future, but we're really excited about it. We think we're getting real traction here. On the far right, the Ombudsman Group, this is the team. I hope none of you had to call the Ombudsman Group, but it's there if you ever need it. We're handling the worst of the worst cases, the most complicated, difficult cases of students in repayment, borrowers in repayment, some are students, who might be having issues with their servicer, their payments, their interest, whatever it is, and we really are there for them. And then you'll see all of the work we've built along the organizational structure that runs really from left to right across the entire life cycle. Marketing, awareness and outreach is a big piece of our work here. We'll speak to that in a second. Customer analytics. We are, one of the first things that I did put in place was bringing in a customer data analytics couple of folks because we wanted everything that we did to be built on as much information and data as we could build on and create fact-based pro formas working with our financial officers and others to make sure that everything we did had a foundation for why we're doing it and the impact. My analytics director likes to say that we're not a data-driven organization. We're data-informed organization that has a mission, that's mission-driven, and I think that's probably a good way to look at it. Our mission is about kids going to school, and we just really like to have the good data to inform what we're doing. And then the other part that runs there is sort of the front office. We're doing quite a bit of work right now in the front office on recompeting a lot of our front-end business to look and try to get more innovation in our system to cut cost where we can so that we are able to better, faster, more simplified service at a better taxpayer return. So that's sort of our organization, how we were set up. I think that, what I shared with you earlier is the fact that we've really tried to focus it on a collaborative, pick your battles, pick things that you can make a cost-neutral story around or efficiency, and that's how we got started as we started building this. So I thought I'd share with you a couple of initiatives that we've kind of pushed through. I won't, unless you want to have a cocktail later, share a lot of the other ones. But there are a number of initiatives in the works. But let me share a couple of them that we picked early on because we knew we couldn't fix everything at once, and we knew that all customer-focused items weren't created equally. And so we decided if we started with the biggest pain points, if we started looking at where if we could make a small difference, or if we can make a small impact and create a good story around that, would we get wind at our back? Would we get some traction in the organization? Because even though I sat at that table with our operating committee, and I still do, I was sort of the new kid on the block and the one with the question mark, what's the customer thing? And it's going to get in here and sort of create problems for us. And, so what I really focused on intensely in the first year, and I still do, is collaboration. A lot of collaboration, a lot of deciding what to pick and work on, which I knew would matter to my counterparts in technology and operations. And collaboration's tough. Cultural change is tough, and I'll share some of those battle scars in a moment. But we serve this young population, these college-going students, and not to say that the borrowers on the back end don't share some of the same interest or mechanisms for how you learn and want aid, but when we started this work in 2011, we were facing a landscape. I don't know if any of you ever shopped for higher ed in 2010 or before, but a landscape cluttered with a lot of websites. That some of them were up to date, some of them weren't. I want to say there were a couple of dozen. I've got a couple of my folks out there, and a couple of dozen different websites you could go to that we all sponsored at the Department of Education to give you information on higher ed, your choices, the cost, all that stuff. Almost impossible to keep current information out there. So one of the initiatives that we continued to bundle up and put out there was cleaning up that landscape. One of the things I think we, in our zealousness to do this, is we bundled that thing up so beautifully that it was going to take multi-year, multi-million dollars to clean it up. And it was too big for the organization to get their head around how to do it. And we kept pushing the ball up the hill. Every time I'd go into an investment review meeting to push the strategy and try to get funds for it, it was about a 5-minute conversation. It could never compete with the operational expenses and running the business that we had to do. And so I'm a slow learner. It took me a few times to figure out that's what was going on. And it just, I pulled my team together and I said, I think we have exactly the right idea here. We got to unbundle it. I was 4 months on the job. I was really pretty sure I was going to get hit in the parking lot one night because there were people who really worked hard on this to bundle it up. But we said, if we're really going to go about this work of integrating the student experience and cleaning up that environment and making it more digitally friendly and all this stuff, we've got to chunk it down. That whole proverb thing about it eating the elephant, a bite at a time, was very real for us. And so we just took that thing apart and we said, look, let's go about this thing in phases. And I want the smallest, most simplified, easy to digest part of it first. And that is the journey that we set off on in 2012, late 2011, and launched in 2012. And it is that our idea of creating a one-stop shop, one place, not 24, one, in the landscape of student aid information, and make sure that we use one URL, because that's where the government at the time was trying to go, still are, and that it has a consistent look and feel. You all know that you have to be consistent around that stuff. The information has to be consistent. It has to be right. And so one place to do that. That's how we started. So what I was able then to sell to our organization was not a big perfect bundle of services. It was, look, in 5 years we want to be here. Right now we are here. This is the part we need to clean up. And even if we don't do another thing beyond this, we're better off than we were before. And by the way, we're going to make this thing such that it returns $2 million back to the Treasury on this work. Because in cleaning up and retiring websites, we're able to actually be much more efficient with what we're doing. And it is one step forward, whereas we can continue to try to sell this thing for 3 years and never make a move. They bought into it. It created a collaborative spirit across federal student aid. Our technology teams, we brought it all in-house. Everybody in-house was working on this. Operations, technology, customer experience, all across the organization. And in July of 2012, we launched the studentaid.gov site, which is our landmark site at this point, and we are continuing to work through that work in phases. I'll share that. I wanted to share this with you because we're talking about how do you get stuff off the ground. And for us, part of that was chunk it down into some phases, create a business case around it that really is efficient, returns dollars if you can. The other thing is we used some of these drivers here to get wind at our back. Now, I was a new kid on the block, so when this executive order on customer service came along, I saw people kind of running for the corners, and I thought, I was just dumb enough to think, let's use that. Let's sort of put ourselves out there and use our studentaid.gov initiative, which at that time was on the drawing boards, and let's make it the signature initiative for the executive order. That's when I met Martha Doris and needed therapy and started therapy. But what this thing did for us, what the executive order did for us, is it galvanized our organization around it. It suddenly became important work to do. It had a great story behind it around efficiency, returning dollars to the taxpayer, cleaning up the environment for the customer, and we used it shamelessly. We still use it. So phase one, as I mentioned, was launched in July of 2012, and it was really the effort to create one website, one place for information, all things you need to know about college, the expenses, and all that. In the last spring, we launched phase two, which really was, if you have multiple loans, you may have also multiple servicers. It's just the way statutorily we're set up right now. But this was an effort to put in one place your entire student loan relationship. So instead of going to NSLDS or going to studentloans.gov and all these other places, we created a presentation front that simplifies that view and says, look, if you're on studentaid.gov and you want to know what your entire loan portfolio looks like, how much do you owe where, you can go to one place now and see it there in a much more user-friendly environment. And we created repayment estimators. So if you're wondering how many decades you've got left, that will help you figure that part out. We are working now on another phase, which by the time we're done with this next phase, if we all live through it, it will allow you to do transactional work on this site. So you can actually go out, make payments, and pull through. That's a much more technically complicated. I've sold my firstborn several times to kind of get that one moving a little bit, and I don't have children, so there you go. It's probably why I've given them all away several times over, but we're really looking forward to the next phase of this work because this is where the rubber hits the road here for it. And at every step of the way, we've really been pounding that drumbeat of efficiency, cost efficiency, neutrality, all of that, which we're really, I think, if we had to face as we face taxpayers every day, I think that we feel that we're accountable with the dollars that we're doing here. Second initiative that we've really focused on is marketing. Awareness, creating outreach opportunities. When I started in 2010, our awareness and outreach efforts were really about a handful of people who would go to college fairs across the country and talk about the FAFSA. And we decided that, look, we're in this business to let people know and inform them that this opportunity is available, and so we need to do better at how we do that for less dollars. So we changed our entire business model around outreach, and we didn't have social media at the time. Go figure, we were serving college students, and I think that's all they do. Have y'all been on a campus lately or seen it? It's like, we were not in that community, we were not in that conversation. And so we began to rethink and rebuild, and this took time, and it's still forming our model around marketing. We want to multiply ourselves and simplify ourselves. So what we did is we put less emphasis on the people flying to college fairs, and we said, pull back on that. What we really need to do is launch a social media initiative, We need to create a portfolio of partnerships across the country of organizations who reach this audience, and let's reach them and multiply ourselves across the country such that we're reaching 10 and 20-fold the audience that we need to for no more cost. In fact, for less cost. So in this work, we have created financial aid toolkits, digital toolkits, which are available to congressionals, to any organization, to you, to anybody in the country who wants to know and share with their groups about federal funding and how to get to college. And we also launched social media a couple of years ago, and I'm very proud to say that this might be some of our finest work around this, is the ability to get into that ever ongoing conversation, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you. I'm with it. I am in this all the way. God. Those are our main properties, and I'm proud to say Nicole Callahan's here with Abraham Marinas. They have launched this in a beautiful way. There's a team of 3 or 4 people who do this, and they're in a constant 24-hour, 7 days a week, all year long conversation with students around FAFSA, repayment, any issue related to higher education. They're constantly in that environment communicating back and forth. Once a month we have what we call office hours, and we have an hour where they man a command center in our office and talk to people around the country about this topic and get all kinds of questions and answers. This doesn't cost a taxpayer a dollar more, but it is helping inform the conversation, and most of all, it's helping us hear what is going on out there. We listen, our customer listening mechanisms are very much in tune to what's happening out there, and we hear issues through our social media reach as quickly as we hear it through any other avenue available to us, and so we're able to respond quickly to that. I couldn't be more excited about what's happening there because it does help us multiply our effort and our work in a big way. And I'll have to say that they, in a few short years, have really made it, I think, an exceptional program, government and private sector as well. So the marketing piece of this has allowed us to do a lot more with a lot less. And again, that's a drumbeat that we continue to hammer here. This is our office hours on Twitter, some of the issues that we have going on. You have 140 characters to respond to this. I mean, can you imagine? Brevity's not me, but thank goodness Nicole has it. She can answer this stuff in no time. We did use our social media to actually do a very proactive campaign this spring on repayment. And it's the first time we've done a campaign leveraging all of these different properties and outreach efforts to make sure we're clarifying the conversation about repayment opportunities. Very big success for us. We didn't know what to expect. We had some baseline issues that we wanted to address, but we think that it worked well enough that we ought to do it every year. We have a cyclical kind of business, so we think that every spring we'll do that. There's a little video here I'll share with you. This is part of our marketing.
Here's your sandwich, miss.
Oh, thank you.
And your burger.
Awesome, thank you.
And your bowl of boiling water, sir.
We have a series of those that we've used throughout this media campaign, and that's pretty much a lot of our audience in that situation, and washing paper plates and that kind of thing. So we think that this is something we should continue to do, because it really is at the heart of the issue for a lot of our customers right now. Is how do you repay this enormous wall of debt? In some cases that they face. Challenges. I could be here all day. I'll share a few with you. These might resonate with you, but I think one of the big challenges for us, and I'll tell you and I'm going to suggest that these are challenges that we experience as an organization. But if you were to get me off as the leader of that organization on my personal challenges as a leader for it, that's another whole conversation that I'd love to have. But as we all face in this work, but as organizational challenges that we had, I think the very first thing is getting ourselves positioned right in the organization as a group. This is difficult, challenging work, and I think that for me, finding the right people to go in the right roles, create the right structure around the right part of the life cycle, that's heavy lifting, and that's a lot of time and investment in how do you get the organizational structure right, and how do you get the right people in the structure. These are people who need to understand customer strategy work, but they also need to understand the business of financial aid, and so it's a tough mix to find. That was the first one. Second one, I think, for us has been integration. So much of everything we do has to be integrated at so many different levels. We're dependent on operations. We're dependent on technology. We're dependent on our financial partners. We are dependent on the policies that surround everything that we do and the things that inadvertently impact our audience. That, on the planning tables of policymaking, you don't think about the downstream impacts. And so we catch that work up. But studentaid.gov and the work we did around that really helped create some grooves for us around how do you create collaboration and how do you create that kind of integration. So really, really important. We can't do this work alone. There's this old proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And, I think of that almost every day. When do we go fast and when do we go together? And most of our work requires that we go together. And that takes a lot of patience at times. The speed of change. The speed of change was a big challenge. I wanted to go fast. I like to go fast. I like to move things quickly. And a lot of our work couldn't go that fast. It couldn't go fast enough for me. I think it couldn't go fast enough for our teams. We wanted impact faster. And, what is a very unnatural act for me was slowing my team down at times. I never had to rev them up, but I often had to listen to, why aren't we going faster? Why aren't we going faster? So the speed of change and how much the organization can swallow, really, and handle is a trick. You have to kind of figure out what is digestible and what is not. And I think we learned that in our first effort around the studentaid.gov, which is chunk it down, create some phases that are digestible, even though it's, might hit your tolerance level for patience. Competing initiatives. We constantly are around the table competing for dollars or competing for a business case with another more important legislatively driven issue. It happens to us all the time. We have great plans sitting there waiting for the right window of time to open it up, and that's a challenge for us, and I think it's probably a challenge for all of you doing this work. And then I'll say the other thing, which is balancing security in this environment and privacy of information with customer satisfaction, but also the customer's need for ease is a real challenge. We just installed a brand new security, user ID and password. Some of you might know this. Back in May, we moved into a much more secure environment. We had to go there. We were way behind going there. We'd been using a PIN system for 20 years. This is what our base was used to. Well, we finally got in the 21st century and we installed the user name and ID process, which does make the environment much better for our customers, and we all have to care about. We're waking up every morning seeing a headline about this. But it's a different change for our consumers, and so they're clogging our phone lines right now. They're having, unusually high wait times and handle times and all that, and so we're just dealing with this friction of we have to protect, but it's impacting ease. And I know that we will hear about that in our SAT scores and different things, but mostly we want to make sure it doesn't impede their ability and their speed to getting federal aid. So those are some of our big challenges. A couple of lessons, learned a lot of lessons, got a lot going on here. The ones appropriate to talk about in public are these. One lesson was, number one, we started with data. I made sure that one of the first hires on the team was that we had to be data informed about what we're doing. It drove every business case we made for our work. It drove every possible framework around measurement. We had to be very clear about our outcomes and how we were going to measure it, and I could not do that without data, and that is where we started. So the data piece was a lesson learned that if I had to do it over again, I'd still do that first. I would still do that first. Where CE is placed in the organization and how we are structured, how we are poised, is really important to the work. The lesson learned here is we have to have a seat at the table. We have to be in the conversation. We have to have things we own. So where we're placed, how we're funded, and what we own. In customer experience in federal student aid, we are at the operating committee. We run the front end part of the business, so we have a budget. And we are responsible and accountable for all of the front end work. And it is that work that gives us credibility to now move to the back end work, to the borrower work, and partner with the business operations leader and how we handle that part. So structurally, there's a lesson in terms of where you sit, how you sit, what you own, and all that. Phases was another lesson learned. Just do it in phases. We're going to always want the best possible outcome as fast as we can for all of our audiences, and the speed of that sometimes can be too much. So chunking down the work, phasing it, creating a financial business case around why it's important, what happens if you don't, selling it, and to me, cost neutrality and selling a savings was big, and it got us off the ground in many cases, and we used it for wind at our back on a lot of other things. So it was a big lesson learned for us there. And cultural lessons learned around cultural change are endless. The collaboration piece is really, really important to us. It's how we get things done. We think it's the right way to get things done. All of us would love to have mandates for everything that we do. It's not the world we live in. And so this cultural change is so difficult and so slow-moving. It's glacial at times, and so it's tough for some of our team to want to run hard and fast. So those are just a few of the lessons we learned. We can elaborate on that if we have time, maybe for Q&A if you'd like to do that. Results, when we started, we had no organization. We had an idea, we had no organization. Today, we have a full structured organization appropriately situated within the federal student aid and in the Department of Education at large, working well. When we started, we had a very cluttered, complicated, complex landscape for our consumers. Today, studentaid.gov, one-stop shop. We're headed right for transactional ability in that. Couldn't be more pleased with where that's working. No real marketing discipline at all when we started. We are now in a very good place with social media, the data that we drive to identify concentrated points across the country where low to moderate income first-generation populations reside. That is where we focus. And we have a portfolio of sponsorships and partnerships across the country that we leverage all day, every day. And so we do it because it's the right thing to do. It's a responsible thing for the taxpayer. We do it because we really do believe that higher education is what the country is about. It's what has put us all in this room in part. And we do it because somewhere that phone will ring and an 18-year-old kid's on the other end of the line thinking that they didn't have a chance, and now they do. So thank you so much for letting me share this story. It's a privilege, and I'll take questions. Thank you. So get me wound up in the morning. I'm out of time. So I'm going to be around. If there are any questions or comments, or if anyone wants to spend time later on another day, I would be more than happy to do that. Thanks so much.